I wasn't a close friend of Prigov, admittedly. I met him several times. I guess the first time I met him in person was in 1994. There was a conference at Aganyok back then, one of the first conferences where Russian and American scholars participated. That was a series of workshops organized by Nancy Kondi and Vladimir Podunov and Helena Gashila on contemporary Russian culture. And many luminaries of contemporary Russian culture were present there. So, and I happened to be sitting next to Prigov, and he was very alert, and so he reacted quite aggressively towards any mentioning of writers like Petrushevskaya or Makanin. Or I don't remember who else. So he was saying, "So what's new about them? They're doing old stuff." Then later, if I'm not missing anything, I've met him again in Las Vegas, of all places, and that was where the conference organized by Dmitri Shalin, professor of the University of Nevada. He That was a very interesting conference because it combined academic papers with artistic presentations, and there was a pretty big art exhibit as a part of this entire thing. And what amazed me in Prigov back then, that whenever the discussion was taking a sort of confusing term and going into the wild direction, he would raise his hand and make some kind of a statement, contribution to the discussion that would completely change the entire situation. He greatly impressed me as a person of the very clear mind, of the very clear reasoning. So he really made sense. I suddenly realized how this is done. I never seen it so practically. And but probably the closest communication that I had with him was much later. It was probably the year 2002 or maybe even 2003. I don't remember right now. There was a traditional film festival in Pittsburgh. As you know, Vladimir Podunov organizes film festivals every May at the University of Pittsburgh, and they typically bring various people to introduce films and, of course, to run discussions, participate in the discussions. And that time they brought Prigov to introduce German's film Хрусталев the Car, because Prigov plays in this film. He plays a small but significant part in this film. And I was introducing Zildovich's Moscow there. So this was a small group of people, and so we were intensively communicating, talking nonstop, all day long. And that time, I was basically asking questions to Prigov, and he was answering with extended monologues. Later on, I realized that some of these monologues were sort of pre-recorded, so he was um, articulating things about which he had written before, and they were sort of records, so set records, almost vinyl records, right? As Akhmatov used to say, plastinki. But there he was explaining his philosophy of the contemporary artist as some kind of a director, theatrical director, directing discourses, making the stage of discourses, and some other things. So probably that was my most sort of lengthy communication with Prigov. Um, so that's about my personal contacts with him. But of course, between this more or less personal contacts, I've seen him performing several times, both in Russia and in the States, and somehow uh, he recognized me. I would say. Um, you see, I should say that it's not me who sees his performance as a centerpiece of his entire project, but it is him. Because since his relatively early writings in the 80s and up to the latest interviews, he was emphasizing that the contemporary artist, as he understands this category, and exemplified by him, of course, because for him, theoretical constructions were inseparable from his sort of artistic practice, um, manifests himself herself on what he called operational level of behavior, and therefore his concept was that the artist appears as the combination of various forms and media he or she explores and uses, but they all connect into this performative behavior, into this performative life project, I would even say. And he used to say that. He even used to say that his works in different genres, they are important only as a byproducts of certain elusive central subject, central performative subject, of course. However, the situation here is more complicated because this performative subject is not given, and it appears as a result of the summation, as probably the common denominator, if we can use this mathematical metaphor, of these various productions in different genres, some overlapping zone between poetry in voices and discourses borrowed elsewhere, right? In singings, in paintings, in just statements, in everyday presence. All this combines into this performative subject, right? Therefore, every new text adds something to this subject, right? Although it's not very clear what is being added because it's about the common denominator, and because Prigov never um, speaks from himself, right? So he negates this category. For him, this himself is the final product of this entire interaction. So for him, performatism, although he never uses this word, is the general strategy of the artistic presence. The contemporary art is performative and can exist only in performative dimension, and all the rest are only means to this end, right? Mm. But on the other hand, of course, his performances per se, performances in this stricter, narrow understanding of the genre, are of course incredibly important for understanding of his art and his work. I wouldn't say that they completely sort of deprive his written texts of meaning, not at all, right? But they add this ultimate horizon, this dimension where all things connect for him, and certainly in his performances, especially in his performances, he did things that uh, cannot be put on paper. For instance, he has this entire genre of azbuki, ABCs, right? And when you read them on paper, and we are including them into the volumes of his collected works, and I expect that there will appear the special volume of his azbukas. But when you read them, it impresses you as gibberish, right? It doesn't work at all. But when you hear him performing this azbukas, it is chanting, it is a ritual, it is a comedy, it's all together, and his intonation, his voice modulations, his gesticulation, it's all part of azbuka. So azbuka, when you read the words of azbuka, it's just a script, right? Which as a, I don't know, libretto for opera, which certainly doesn't convey the overall impression of the opera. The same with his famous mantras of Russian culture,
Mhm.
where, as you certainly know, he was taking the first stanza of Evgeny Onegin and presenting it as a sacred text and singing it as a Buddhist prayer, as a Muslim prayer, as a Russian Orthodox prayer. At least these three forms. Although Buddhist was more celebrated, and recordings preserve this one, but it can only be seen and heard, right? Because if you read it, so what you read Pushkin's first stanza of an Evgeny Onegin. We all read it, and it changes drastically. Uh, and Prigov, I should say, was absolutely tireless in inventing and exploring new performative genres. For instance, this mantras is his complete invention. Uh, Maybe there were some precedents elsewhere, but I don't know about them. And certainly, it is a form of counterculture. It's a form of critique of the cultural canon, and the form of statement about the comedy of Russian sacralization of classical literature. And I remember exactly at this Las Vegas conference that I mentioned how some people present at the audience reacted to this performance. They were offended. And
Mhm.
that's exactly what Prigov wanted, because some people were just literally falling from chairs uh, so hard they were laughing. Others were literally offended, and that's how he works. But he was also singing in operas, right? He was doing films with Iraida Yusupova. He was doing performances with Prigov family group. He actually played in several movies, as I mentioned before. And even his reading of his poems, they are always performative, right? It's not the same. You should. Luckily, there are quite a few recordings of him reciting his poetry, and if you heard it once, you will hear his voice and his intonation when reading the poetry again.